Hey everybody, it's me, Andrew Marklowitz. I just wanted to say hi, and here's another video. So this one is going to be kind of when you're having theological discussion or even like civil discussion, kind of what you should do and how you should be doing your argumentation. And so what you should be doing is you should be, if you're don't know this person is a stranger, the best thing to do is break the ice. So break your crust. Then you're going to take questions kind of through that slowly lead you down. Oh, you can't see my cursor. There you go. You're going to break your crust. You're going to take questions that slowly lead you down to this. Your core argumentation. And I'll give you an example. So, full stop, my opinion, abortion is murder. End of story, period. And argumentation for that is quite simply the ultimate question I can end up asking anybody on the other side of the aisle is, what stage does life begin, and how do you justify that's the stage of what life begins? And then if that's the stage that life begins, okay, when does life end? What stage does it end? And is it viable to terminate both ends? And if the answer to those two questions is yes, and with a time and positioning, one, I'm incredibly disturbed for that person, but that aside, I then have to look at it as, hey, this is how this is. And kind of have to let that person go because obviously they're set in their moral framework. They fully understand and comprehend their moral framework. But when it's a no, then I can argue from the point of conception. Then I can argue from how are you disagreeing with the fact that life starts at conception? How are you disagreeing with that? There's so many, and then I can get into all of the data, information, the scientific facts of just the uterus's basic purpose and function, all sorts of things like that. That's what that allows you to get into. You can kind of do the same with gun violence too, as I found out. And the question you asked there, that's your core question and core argumentation, is violence a mindset? And the reason why you frame it as, is violence a mindset, is because if they agree violence is a mindset, and I should define mindset, mindset is thoughts into action. So thoughts turned to action is a mindset. And if that's the definition in which violence can be, one, violence is therefore neutral. You can have good thoughts that lead to good violence, and you can have bad thoughts that lead to bad violence. So therefore, it still keeps violence for what it is, actually neutral. It's now defined it as a framing of mind that has to happen to a person, and then from that argumentation, I can clearly point out, well, obviously the problem is with the person and how easily one is swayed or reasoned into violence. That's the real problem that we should be digging at and tackling, not what tools they're choosing to use. Because the bigger problem is obviously that this mindset is too accessible, or it's not getting framed correctly. What can we do as a society to better help frame young minds and frame minds to prevent violence and those kind of things? And we can put the funds, time, and money into the world and the environment that actually tackles that part of the issue and actually progresses towards things. This is why I call it core argumentation. I guarantee you someone way smarter than me thought about this way faster and has a much cooler name for it. Blah, 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 blah. I'm some 25-year-old in the middle of nowhere. I understand that. But this is just kind of my thought process of how I talk to people, how I debate people, how I engage with people when it comes to these things. And it is important to me. It's really important to me. It's tough when you have these argumentations and stuff like that. And what I noticed was some people tried to point out that it was a logical fallacy. Um, when, for example, like some people, it seems like when I do like um, metaphors or anything like that, or transliterations, I guess is probably the better term. I'll give you an example. I got in a discussion with someone who lives outside of this country yesterday. Um, and they were telling me about, oh, America didn't used to be so political, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, well, or our politics and religion weren't so tied. One, I would completely disagree with that as someone who actually has studied and read a lot of U.S. history and paid attention to most of my high school and most of my history classes of America. I would say religion has been a massive, heavy tie, especially considering the fact that we first came here as persecuted religious people, was like the major reason for coming to America, was to escape persecution from religion. So yes, definitely was very tied into our framework and has always been tied into our framework. That's never not been the case. I know an outsider's perspective might see it that way, but never not being the case in America. Um, that aside, and basically, he was wondering, why aren't you doing this in the public square? When he was asking about Kirk, and my argumentation was, the college is the public square of importance, and it just seemed to keep going over his head. I used the um, the terminology and thought process of, if I want to save prostitutes from prostitution, I have to go where the prostitutes go. And I forget what fallacy he put up to me. He said, that's a non-connected fallacy. And I was just like, that's not what I'm saying, dude. I'm saying, if I see a problem, I have to go where the problem goes. His immediate thought, I don't know what it was, but his immediate thought process was to say, wasn't to think of it in like a metaphorical term or anything like that, but think of it literally. I am saying that I don't even know. Like, he definitely incorrectly used the logical fallacy he was claiming I had. I don't even remember which one it was. But, and he was very quick to do that a lot of the times. He was always trying to point out a logical fallacy with my argument, and I've noticed that with some people, that they just try to shoot and say, oh, you're a logical fallacy here, logical fallacy here, logical fallacy here, logical fallacy here, logical fallacy here. And it's like, no, I'm not. Like, this isn't a logical fallacy here. This is correctly ascribed to XYZ thing. You're just not thinking correctly about how I'm using it. I.e., the great example of, if I want to save prostitutes, I have to go where the prostitutes are. If I want to save people from a bad ideology that has been taught in campuses for, I think, upwards of 40 years at this point, and the right has completely given up on those places that teach and train our young minds, and therefore have thus, now we have like 2 generations worth of this problem, having trained and taught our young minds. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go to those colleges because that's where the problem's at. The thought process is I have diagnosed the problem. I have diagnosed where the problem is. Now I'm going to treat the problem. It's not that hard to figure out. And he kept on asking, well, why aren't you doing this in the greater square? And it's like, we are. But the greater square also needs to be on the college campuses, because our problem right now is with our youth. And he didn't seem to understand that. And I've noticed that's a problem that I see with a lot more progressive-minded people, is they never seem to understand the idea of, I am ascribing a thought process to this and kind of transliterating it to you. But I mean, I think you can see what I mean by, like, it's important to not only be able to do the core argument stuff, but your outer core is kind of what I was just doing there, where, like, I was explaining and using metaphors, using reasoning, using my big logic, using, like, my core pieces of data to argue. That's kind of what I wanted to demonstrate by talking out that whole conversation right there and what was happening and going on. So this is kind of just wanted to be a video like this because I think this is important when you're talking and discussing about things. Because if you don't have a good framing for how you for setting yourself into a conversation, you're always going to feel like you've lost the argument, and you're always going to feel like the other person just dominates you. And then another key thing to watch out for is people who talk incredibly long, and also people who talk really fast. It doesn't make them good at debate. What it makes them good at doing is being able to move so quickly through the conversation or hold the conversation for so long they can change the conversation. So you got to really watch out for that. And you've always got to kind of drag them back in. And be ready to watch for it and drag them back in. It is something else I've noticed too. This is kind of just a little video on like core argumentation, how to argue them, and like stuff to watch out for when you're having these conversations, and how to argue better, honestly. Well, that'll be it for this video. Catch you guys later. Remember to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Hit the bell icon.